So today I'm going to talk about peer review and publication. I'm going to talk about that in some very general terms, but I will give examples from my experiment, which is one of the largest experiments in the world these days. So let me start by reminding you, in case you attended previous lectures in this series. So at the end of June, Marcella told you pretty much about the physics that we're after, the challenges in the theory and experiments. Then at the beginning of February, Jorge explained to us how we move from new ideas for experiments, for measurements, all the way to approval of an experiment. It's a very complex process. It takes a lot of effort. There are many doubters, there are many naysayers, so you have to overcome all of that. It's not easy. And then 2 weeks ago, Debbie told us about actually the construction of the Minerva experiment, from its inception all the way to having the experiment ready to take data. So after building the experiment, which is typically what we refer to as the hardware, we have been developing its software, of course. And in the CMS experiment, and I will go into some details about the experiment, so don't be too intimidated by the name. It's just a name. It stands for something. That step, the building the experiment, the hardware and the software, took roughly 15 years. So this is a huge effort on the part of thousands of people. It's not only building an experiment, it's actually solving problems at the frontier of science right there and then. So we typically challenge ourselves with the technology because we want to get the best sensitivity for the physics that we're after. So that's why it takes a long time. Quite often when we start, we don't really know how to solve the problems. So we're doing what is called R&D, and then we test it. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail. We go back to the drawing board, and it takes a long time. Now, once we're done, comes the fun stuff, which is taking data and verifying its quality. So in this CMS experiment, we started that step in 2009, starting by taking data that was brand new to us and verifying its quality step by step. It's a very, very long process, convincing ourselves that we understand the data. And then right away, we started doing the analysis. And we have been doing analysis of this experiment since then. So now, before I get to talk about this, let me give you a little bit of a brief introduction. You may call it background material about the CMS experiment and maybe a little bit about my roles, so that you can understand where I'm coming from in these descriptions. So where is the detector? How does the detector look like? Who is working on the experiment? I'm sure some of you know it, but probably not everybody. So I just want to remind you and make sure that we all understand where the experiment and how it operates. And then I'll briefly go through my recent roles in the CMS experiment. So CMS, actually, unlike the experiments that you heard about in the previous lectures, this experiment is not located at Fermilab. I used to run, in an experiment that was working on the Tevatron at Fermilab. That was the D0 experiment. But since 2004, I moved to work on an experiment that is located in Switzerland, in Geneva. So I'm not sure that you can see in the middle of this slide, there is a map. I don't know if you can see where I'm pointing, but there is a red circle. This is the corner where France, Germany, Switzerland, and Italy are meeting more or less. At the very corner there, at the tip of Switzerland, resides Geneva. And in Geneva, and actually on the border of Switzerland and France, is the location of the lab. This is the equivalent of Fermilab in the US. In Europe, the lab name is CERN. It stands for the European Center for Research, and the N, when they started, it was nuclear, but it's right now all about high energy physics. So this is the European equivalent of Fermilab, and it's serving all the European countries and some, and many more. So in that place, they built a huge accelerator, much bigger than the one that we used to have at Fermilab. If you remember the Tevatron, the LHC, the Large Hadron Collider, is about 4 times larger. So its circumference is 27 kilometers. This is huge. So if you want to go from one side of the ring to the other side, it takes about half an hour. And that's what it takes us typically to get from the campus, the main campus of the CERN lab, to our experiment, the CMS experiment. So it's a half an hour commute just to get there for us. Now, the CMS experiment is located here. This is, I don't know if you can see it clearly, the picture is not great, but that's the best that I could find. So this is Lake Geneva. This is where Geneva is. This is where CERN is, the lab, and the airport right behind that. And this is where the experiment is, the CMS experiment. CMS stands for Compact Muon Solenoid. These are the 3 main features of the experiment. It's the heaviest, it's by far the heaviest experiment in terms of weight at the LHC, yet it's very compact. And the 2 main features in terms of detecting what we're after these days is a terrific muon system and a solenoid, which is the strongest one in the world as of today. So let me give you a few LHC facts in case you haven't heard much about the LHC. Again, just to give you some perspective on what we have been doing. So the velocity of the protons is basically the speed of light. Typically, when we talk about, relativity, we talk about speed that is approaching something like the speed of light in terms of its size. Here we're talking about, you see the number, pretty much the speed of light. So, for example, you can go through a simple exercise. You know what the speed of light is. You know the circumference of the LHC. So the protons are crossing the French-Swiss border roughly 11,000 times per second. And in fact, they're crossing it twice because they go and come back, go and come back, go and come back. So we used to joke about that back in the days when we had to show passport when we crossed the border. That's what they do 22,000 times a second. So it's a phenomenal machine. The energy of the beams, it's very high energy, would melt 1 ton of copper. The energy in the magnets, so there are the bending magnets, the magnets that make sure that the protons that are going at the speed of light basically don't go in a straight line and disappear, but actually go in circles. The energy in these magnets would melt 18 tons of gold. So there's enormous amount of energy even in the magnets. The vacuum in the accelerator is 10 times better than the surface of the moon. So you recall that we always say we have an atmosphere here on Earth, but when we go to the moon, it's basically vacuum and we cannot breathe. We need help. Well, that kind of a vacuum on the moon is not good enough for us inside the accelerator, because then the protons will still hit the particles that it finds and go away, and we cannot collimate them and we cannot construct the beams. So the vacuum is 10 times better than that on the surface of the moon. And last fact, the temperature inside the magnet. So these are superconducting magnets, and the temperature inside them is colder than the space between galaxies. So when we talk about the temperature in the universe, not in our small neighborhood, but in the universe at large, we're talking about roughly 3 Kelvin. So this is 3 degrees above the absolute zero. The temperature inside the magnet is about half of that. And the reason for that is because we want a superconductor, so we won't pay too much. We won't have too much resistance in the magnet, and we won't pay too much for the electricity that we're using. The CMS experiment. The experiment is huge. It's basically a huge cylinder. Its length is 80 feet. Its diameter is 50 feet. So this is basically 5-story building. Its weight is 14,000 tons, which is, just to give you an analogy, it's equivalent to about 30 jumbo jets. So the detector itself is big, is heavy, and yet it's probably the most delicate device ever built by humans. It consists of many components, very delicate, very sophisticated. And in case you're familiar with weeding out electronic signals, we're weeding out roughly 100 million electronic signals for every event. Just in case you wonder about the size, I don't know if you can see here in the middle, this is one of the slices of this cylinder. And here I'm standing with a colleague of mine from the experiment. This is the two of us standing right here, and you see the size. It's huge. It's really huge. Now, the CMS collaboration. The CMS collaboration actually consists of, as you can see here, roughly 5,000, more than 5,000 members, which includes physicists, engineers, technicians, theorists, admins, you name it, everybody that works on the experiment. These people are coming from 241 institutions from around the world. In our case, in CMS, they're coming from 55 countries, and you see the world map, and the countries that work on the CMS experiment are all marked in blue. So not everybody, but many countries, many people. And we have to do it coherently. Now, it's hard to see all the numbers here on the screen, but we can also count the number of people that are the authors of our papers. In that case, it's a subset of all the members. You know, typically engineers, technicians, admins, they don't care about the papers. They concentrate on more specific problems to deal with. So we have few engineers on our papers, but it's basically only scientists, only physicists. And as of today, we have around 2,300 authors on every paper of CMS. In terms of the distribution of manpower, if you will, around the globe, in the US, we account for roughly 30% of the scientists in the collaboration. It's probably hard to do the math here quickly, but Europe is accounting for around 50%, and the rest is from countries in other places, Asia, Latin America, and so on. The CMS people. So we are many, many people. As I said, thousands of people. And so when we meet every so often at CERN or elsewhere, not everybody can come. And in fact, typically, we're talking about several hundreds of people that can come at any given time. It's both time consuming, many people have to do other things, and of course it's expensive. So not everybody can come too often. We typically have 4 or 5, collaboration-wide meetings every year. This is one of them that was held on June 27, 2012. And I don't know if that date means much to most people around, but this is pretty much a week before we announced the discovery of the Higgs boson that was on July 4th, 2012. Now, the people that are standing here are standing in front of something that you might think is the detector, but actually it's not. It's just a real size photo of the CMS detector. So you can see the size. The detector is actually in place underground, 100-meter underground, where the accelerator is. So this is just an example for how many people are coming at one given time. There are other examples. Of course, there are many other meetings of people in the collaboration that are much smaller than that. You see here on the top left, these 2 scientists are sitting actually in the main control room of the experiment, running the experiment. The same thing is true here on the right bottom. And the other 2 are taken during one of these CMS collaboration meetings, CMS weeks, we call them. So let me say a few words about my recent roles at CMS. The experiment is at CERN. We in the US are thousands of miles away and somewhere between 6 and 9 time zones away from CERN. That makes it very difficult to communicate. So for example, if I work with somebody in the afternoon and we need some help from an expert that is in Europe, well, those people are already back at home and most likely are asleep. So the time difference and the distance, sheer distance, convinced us to build a big center at Fermilab to serve the US community. So it was created in 2004, and we called it LHC Physics Center, or in short, LPC. It has been serving about 700 US physicists, and in fact, it became so successful that many others wanted to join us, come spend some time. So we also served colleagues from other countries that have been working on the CMS experiment. It hosted regularly about 150 physicists at the lab, which we call a critical mass. So when you need to solve a problem in a collaboration like this, in an experiment so big and so complicated, you always need help, advice from people, experts on this, experts on that. So you need to communicate constantly with many people. Typically, when you work at the university, you don't have these people around, and it makes it very difficult. Being at the lab helps, but again, if you only have the lab people, it helps a lot, but it's not enough. Even we at the lab don't have all the expertise that we need for that particular experiment. So when we have 150 physicists constantly from US universities at the lab, working at the LPC, that helps a lot. We call it the critical mass. So if you have any need for help on any particular topic, your chances are excellent to find somebody out of these 150 people that can help you. And so then you solve the problem and you move on. We don't want to solve the same problems again and again. We have to solve the new things. And so you don't want to get stuck. You get help and you move forward. The LPC made the US CMS extremely efficient and very creative. So extremely efficient for the reason that I explained above, the critical mass effect, but also very creative, because when you put so many talented people together, you're bound to come up with new ideas, creative solutions, innovation, you name it. This is exactly the definition of a research environment. So it was fantastic. It became a major success, and it has been serving as an exemplary model for other countries, other regions, and in fact also for other experiments. So now we have more than one center at the lab serving a given experiment. What you see around the pictures, let me go from bottom left. So this is, for example, one of the activities that we had. We had a school where we trained young people, those that are new to the experiment, in the technical jargon of the experiment, how we do things, how you can approach things, and everything was done hands-on. So we train people in such a way that when they're done with the training, they can go back to their institutions if they want to. Of course, they can stay, but if they want to go back, and now they're capable of doing the work that needs to be done in the area of their interest. As you can see in the picture right by it, this is how young people these days work. I think it's fine as long as they produce what needs to be produced. The next picture is showing, one of the lectures during this school. Above that, our former director, Nigel Lockyer, giving the prizes to the team that did the best, in the internal competition within that school. And at the top right, you see the poster that we prepared during the discovery of the Higgs boson. So this is the story of the Higgs boson as seen from the LPC through its own contributions. So the LPC had unique contributions to that discovery, and we captured it all here. The next job that I wanted to mention, and this is now directly related to this lecture, I've been serving for 4 years until September of last year as the chair of the publications committee. The charge is very simple. The charge is to oversee the publications of the CMS papers, including conference notes, and ensure they're high quality. It's pretty straightforward, except that it's not that easy to accomplish. And so I had a very big team that helped me. You can see there is this org chart here. Oops, back. Where you see the leadership of that effort, but then there are many more people involved with the daily work related to publications. So that group consisted of a little bit more than 100 people dedicated to making sure that the publications are excellent. And I'll define that later on. On the left-hand side, you see a graph that shows the progression of the number of publications. So this is the time, this is 2010, all the way to today. and this is the number of publications. This is a breakdown of this publications split by the topics. So, for example, the blue is searches for new physics. The orange is standard model measurements. The red is Higgs boson related analysis, and so on and so forth. So there are many of them in many different areas. We covered many, many different topics. It's tremendous amount of work. It's a huge responsibility, but I have to tell you, it's lots of fun. So let me go now to our main theme tonight, the peer review and publication. So the outline for this lecture is the following. First of all, I'll tell you about how we tell the world of our findings. There is more than one way. And then I'll talk about papers' characteristics, length, substance, journals. The event that Becky mentioned at the very beginning, the submission of the 1000th publication, which was a historical milestone. How we review our physics analysis leading to publications. The process. The process is actually pretty long and pretty complicated. So I'll show you how we define it in the CMS language, and then I made an attempt at simplifying it in a way that I hope will make everybody understand what we're doing. And of course, the final word at the end. So how do we tell the world about our findings? There are a variety of ways. The first two bullets describe what I would call the informal way of informing the community. So the one that everybody is familiar, blogs, Twitter, Instagram, but then there is something that goes through the big labs, what we call here at Fermilab, Fermi News. At CERN, they call it CERN Magazine, the same thing you have in other labs worldwide. Keep in mind that everything that goes into these articles that you may read in Fermi News or CERN Magazine or in the blog, Twitter, Instagram has to be related to analysis that was approved by the collaboration. So we're not telling anybody about, how sausages are made, the details, and maybe, and we don't know. All of this is internal. When we approved an analysis, when we're all happy about it and we think it's correct, only then people can put it on their blogs, Fermi News, and so on. But again, these are the informal ways. Now we get to the more formal ways of doing it. Conference talks. So when we review an analysis and we're happy with it as a collaboration, everybody has a chance to comment on this. Nobody's objecting. Then we approve it as what we call preliminary result. At that point, it can go to a conference and one of us will present it there. It may be presented for the very first time. It may be presented for the 10th time. As long as there is no paper associated with it published, it is called preliminary. Now, the vast majority of the preliminary results end up exactly the same in the paper. The main difference would be that in the paper, things are a lot more polished in terms of explaining what we're doing to make sure that nobody gets confused. Now, once in a while, we find out that preliminary result has to be tweaked a little bit. So we do it, we fix it, and then we publish the paper. And the paper, the scientific publications that we call the papers, that's the most formal and the final results. So this is the way we measure the success of an experiment. And you can look at the number of papers, you can look at the quality of papers. What are they measuring and how many different things they're measuring? Of course, there might be discoveries, but those are extremely rare. Last is, of course, press releases, but these are very rare. This is only when we get something that we think actually the public is interested in, that it's not just for our community, not only the high energy physics community, not only the physics community, but actually everybody. Characteristics of papers. So there are different types of papers. First of all, they're long or short. The long ones, we call them articles. The short ones, we call them letters. The long ones can be tens of pages, hundreds of pages, depending on the complexity of the analysis and how many details our community would be interested to know. So if this is something very complicated, very involved, took many people to get it done, you want to spend the effort of explaining every single piece of that analysis. So that would be a long article. The short ones that we call the letters are typically several pages. And in some of the magazines, in journals, for example, in physical review letters, you can submit papers there only up to 4 pages. So if you have 5 pages, they reject it. That means you have very little space to explain what you did. And in addition to that, it has to be very important measurement, very important result, and very timely. So the bar is very high, and there are about 1/3 of our papers that are published as letters. Most of them are published as articles. Now, the content of the paper can be either technical development or a physics result. Both of them are important, and we send them to different journals, typically. Now, all of them are submitted to the most prestigious peer-reviewed journals in the US and Europe. So we're actually submitting papers only to 7 or 8 journals. That's it. We don't just send them around to different journals just because the peer review is easier to overcome. No, we actually send them to the ones with the best, with the harshest peer review. And the reason is obvious. We think that that's where they belong. So I was often asked when I served in this capacity, what keeps you awake at night? And the answer, in a very general, clumsy way, is being responsible for the career of thousands of physicists worldwide. Now, what I mean by that is not that I'm in charge of their career. No, not even close. But I can actually cause tremendous damage to many of them. So if we were to publish a paper with a result that is incorrect, we made a mistake, that would stain the resume, the CV of all of us, everybody. There's no way to blame 1 or 2 or 3. If you are a member of the collaboration, as you will see in a few minutes, you are given an opportunity to read the paper and to comment on any part of that, the analysis, the clarity, anything. So there is no excuse. If we were to publish a result that is incorrect, that will cause tremendous damage to thousands of people. And that's a major concern. The good news is that no CMS paper has ever been rejected. It's due to the exhaustive review process within the collaboration. And in fact, many people claim, and I agree with that completely, it is much harder to pass that review within the collaboration than the journal's peer review. In the journal, and many of us are also journal referees, you know, it's 1 or 2 or 3 people that are reading the paper. And what is the chance that we will find something wrong in a paper that went through such a rigorous review process? Very small. So when I review it, I still make sure that I agree with what's there in there, both physics, content, and clarity. But again, the chances are very small because we do it in such an exhaustive way. The submission of the 1000th publication. So on June 19, 2020, wow, this is almost 2 years ago, we reached a momentous milestone by submitting the 1000th paper for publication. And in doing so, we became the first experiment in the history of high energy physics to reach this outstanding total number of papers. Now, all of that was done in only 12 years. The reason that I say only is because the previous record belonged to the Tevatron experiments, CDF and D0. These are the experiments that ran at Fermilab. They ran for about 25 years, and they submitted a little more than 600 papers each. So it's not that easy to produce so many physics results that pass the bar to be new, interesting, timely, and correct all the way. Now, the excitement back then was, as you may imagine, quite large. So one of our colleagues produced this YouTube clip. So let me just show it to you. There is no audio. It's just cute. So please be patient with me. Here it comes. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that. It was cute. At least we thought that back then. Now, when you look at so many publications, you may get the impression that actually we work in an assembly line, you know, in a factory where we just produce them one after the other. That's not the case. We actually review very carefully each analysis and make sure that everything is correct. We ensure that the presentation of the results, whether in a scientific conference or in a formal publication, is precise and clear. And I hope we all understand the difference between the two. Correct means that the physics is correct. Precise and clear refers to the description. So if I describe what I'm doing and you misunderstand it, my philosophy is it's my fault. I didn't make myself clear enough. So if I give you a paper, you read it and you say, it looks like you did this, this, and that, and that's not what I did, this is my fault. So we look at every paper through these eyes and made sure that everything is precisely described and it's clear to the readers. This takes a big effort on the part of many people to do it for each and every analysis. So when we talk about 1,000 papers, every single one of them went through this rigorous process. Now, let me go quickly through the way we explain it to our colleagues. So this is the review process in CMS in the CMS jargon. We start from the top left and go, you see the arrows, you see how we go there, all the way to the right, we go down, we go to the left, we go down. It's complicated, and if you try to read what it says, it's even more confusing, even for members of CMS, especially new members. So let me quickly move on from this, but before I do it, let me explain one thing. As you can see, there are two ways to finish this process, the review process. One on the left-hand side, you know, the left-hand side ellipse is ending up with a conference note. This is the note that accompanies a result that we send to a conference. So when we present something in a conference, there is always a note that accompanies it. It's not a publication in the true sense of the word. It's not the final result. It's a conference note. Whereas when you go on the right-hand side, what you see is what we call a journal publication, a paper. So again, on the left-hand side, these are preliminary results that we send to conferences. And on the right-hand side, these are final results. Once we publish, this is it. There's no way to get back to that and say, oops, I didn't mean that. So it's a very long and incredibly comprehensive process consisting of many, what we feel, necessary steps. So let me try to simplify it here. First of all, replace the CMS jargon with plain English wherever I can, and also add the number of physicists involved at every step. So here's my attempt at making it a little bit more transparent. So first of all, what you see in the box on the right-hand side in a nutshell is a brief description of first the review of the analysis and then the publication. Again, the review leading to a preliminary result that we send to conferences, and the publication, it leads to a submission of the paper to a scientific journal. And that's the final word on that analysis. So let me go through the steps one by one. So here now I'm showing you on the x-axis the amount of time that it takes to go through each one of these processes. The analysis and the review takes somewhere between several months to several years within the collaboration, depending on the quality of the analysis, the complexity of the analysis, how many people are involved, the topics. There are many, many, many reasons why analysis can move fast versus some analysis that take years to converge on. The publication part typically takes several weeks. It can take a little longer if the paper is not in a good shape in the early stages, but typically it takes several weeks. So how do we do this? First of all, let me just add here on the y-axis the number of physicists that are involved at every step. And as you can see, this is not a linear scale. This is what we call a logarithmic scale. But basically, you see a few physicists, tens of physicists, hundreds of physicists, or thousands of physicists. Okay? And now let's start with the process. So we have an analysis team. An analysis team typically consists somewhere between a few people, a handful of people, to tens of people in a more complicated analysis, for a variety of reasons. It can be, you know, a small team or a large team. Once this group, the analysis team, reaches a certain level where they think they can begin to share what they have with more people that are interested in this topic, they bring it to what we call a physics subgroup. So in CMS, we have a handful of physics groups, physics analysis groups. For example, one is dedicated to Higgs boson, one is dedicated to top quark, another one to searches for new physics, and so on. This is not yet the physics group. This is the physics subgroup that is interested in this particular topic. They bring it to that group, typically consisting of tens of people. So for example, if the analysis team consists of a handful of people or maybe 15, the subgroup may be 80 people. So you have more people now looking at this and giving them feedback, asking them tough questions, required to do cross checks, do this, do that, until they are happy with analysis. Once they're happy with the analysis move on to the next level, which is the physics group. For example, the Higgs boson physics analysis group. In that group, there are hundreds of people. They are all interested in Higgs physics, but not necessarily in this particular analysis or even in this particular way of doing things. But they have expertise in Higgs physics, and they have a good perspective on what needs to be done, how things are done, and so on. This analysis is now being debated in the physics group until the leaders of the physics group feel that it matured to a level where it's correct and well explained in a note accompanying it. At that point, they call what we call a pre-approval meeting. This is a meeting where they invite everybody in the physics group, whether those that attended the meetings where this was presented or not, everybody is invited to that pre-approval meeting. Everybody is entitled to ask questions, and the analyzers have to answer every single one of them. Assuming everything was done correctly, there are no loose ends, everything is correct. The leaders of the physics group declare this analysis pre-approved, and then the publication committee chair appoints a small group of people, 4 people, that we call an ARC, Analysis Review Committee. These people have nothing to do with this group. They're coming from CMS at large, not from this particular group. They have a very different perspective on an analysis that comes from a group that they don't belong to. We want that perspective. We want fresh eyes looking at this, asking as many questions as they feel like until they're satisfied. Once they're satisfied, this analysis will be presented to the entire collaboration. And the entire collaboration, again, is thousands of people. Every single one of them get an invitation to join the presentation. The presentation is called the approval. The approval of the analysis. Every member of the collaboration can join the meeting and ask as many questions as they like, and the analyzers have to answer them. This process may take 2 hours. It may take weeks. You know, if the questions are still coming in and people are not satisfied and there is back and forth, so the analysis can be approved at the end of this meeting or weeks later. This is a process that in principle doesn't even have to converge. If the collaboration is not convinced that the analysis is correct, it's not going to be approved. Because if it is approved, it can go outside the collaboration. It can be presented to the rest of the community. And this has to come only with approval of the entire collaboration. So this is the point where the analysis and the review end. At this point, again, the analysis can be presented in conferences, but in parallel, the group had to produce a paper. This is the scientific description of this analysis that will be submitted for publication. So they post it for the collaboration now to make comments. The collaboration has 2 weeks to read it and make, again, any comment on any aspect of the paper, whether it's physics or clarity or style or language, whatever people feel is not done properly, and the analyzers have to answer that. Either fix it or say, no, actually it's correct because, and explain it. The ARC, the group that I mentioned before in green, has to go through all the answers and approve that. Once this is approved, the paper goes to the publication group that will polish it to the nth degree. We don't want to go into the details there. And then the paper is ready for publication and it's going to be submitted. So again, what you see here is a very interesting process that starts with a small team of people and grows exponentially to include the entire collaboration. So no paper is coming out of CMS without the entire collaboration being exposed to it and invited to read it and make comments. There's no way that the paper will come out and a member of the collaboration will say, well, I didn't even know that, or, I didn't see it. They get a message in their inbox. So everybody's invited to comment, and many people do. And when they do, the analyzers have to reply. They have to explain what they did, why they did, and if they fix something based on these comments, explain what they did. This process, the publication, again, is a lot faster because we already have a paper with an analysis that has been approved. So the physics, for most parts, is already being reviewed extensively and it's correct. It's just the paper, the description that has to be very precise, very clear, and of course the language has to be perfect. So the final word. In CMS, we have an extremely meticulous review and publication process. It had led to the dissemination of world-class physics results, which were clearly explained in a huge number of scientific publications. Both the total number of papers, currently about 1150, I think as of today, and their physics diversity are unparalleled. Thank you.